big numbers coming through from Stats South Africa in as far as the unemployment rate is concerned. And even more people are now out of work in this country, according to new figures. The country's unemployment rate has risen to 34.9%. Let's get more then. I'm joined by eNCA's business editor, Devan Murugan, who's here to help us make sense of it all. Devan, at Q2, we were sitting at the narrow definition at about 34.4%, and now we are at 34.9%. We are knocking on the door of 35%. That seems to me to be disastrous by any measure in terms of the numbers.
That's a sizable number that you're talking about, Tulis. And before we even go through the percentages and go through the figures, we do this all the time, every quarter, don't we? And for some reason, you're about to get immune at some point with these numbers. But why are they important? Because if you remember, we just came out of a budget. We had this huge topic and debate about the situation with grants in this country. I mean, who would be fed grants? Obviously, the people that are not working, that are incapable of generating an income. There is so many other policy tuning that government does, and it has to do with these numbers. So let's break it down. I mean, this is the number you actually gave us in the preamble. The official unemployment rate, you'd write, rises to 34.9%. What does that do? It puts 7.6 million people out of work in this country. But that's not the full picture, Tulis, because that's the number behind you that's significant here, right? These are people that have been discouraged, that have given up looking for work, and they don't, for whatever reason, fit into the official definition of unemployment. Take a look at that figure. 12.5 million South Africans in this country out of work.
Basically creeping up to 50% of our population. That's, well, the population that is capable, willing and able to work, but, you know, not finding work.
Cannot find work. Yeah. And the persistent story is there. We've got an economy that is unable to absorb them. Not only are we losing jobs, but remember the market, the labor market has been flooding with new entrants, and this economy is not moving at a fast enough rate to absorb them.
Yeah. So the other picture that always shines through when you're talking unemployment, Devan, is given our youthful population, that whole debate about a youth dividend not being realized by a country such as ours. And that's always a concerning picture, and this time around is no different.
It's no different. Again, I'll point to the finance minister. Before his budget, he said what he wants are people that are in jobs rather than reliant on a grant. Well, this next stat is precisely the bunch he's talking about. 15 to 24 years old. Look at that. That almost seems unbelievable.
Scary.
In the third quarter, rising to 66.5%. Now, these are people between the ages of 15 to 24 years old who do not have work in this country. It gets bleaker when you look at what they are doing. So how many of these people are there, Tulis?
Yeah.
Just over 10 million people. This next slide, called NET, describes them as those people that are not in employment, education, or training. How many of them are not in employment, education, or training? Just under 3.5 million people between the ages of 15 to 24. Now, you wonder why getting jobs and getting training in this country is crucial.
Yeah, and this is really where the crisis is really emphasized and pronounced even more, because as I talk about the youth dividend, the flip side of it is that this is the rock bed for, you know, many social ills. This is where it's easy to get people involved in riots, as we are now listening to the testimony there of Kehla Sithole and some of the issues being highlighted there. The fact that on any given weekday in South Africa, it's quite easy to just get 1,000 people to join a spontaneous riot, and many of them will be young people.
Yes, indeed. I mean, there's your answers to where you would find the source of that, because socially, development-wise, you know, it's a bed that just laid to rest here, and we just produce more and more of this particular group.
So what are we seeing, Devan, in as far as the picture goes provincially? Because one of the things that would be interesting, Q3 would have covered the period that included the July riots that are subject to the South African Human Rights Commission hearings, would it?
It would indeed, because remember, this particular set of figures covers July to September, what is known as the third quarter. Let's take a look at the provinces to answer that. I mean, remember, those riots were prominent in KZN,
Yeah.
a few riots in Gauteng, but KZN was the big number. So what you're looking at here is you're looking at the unemployment rate in the different provinces. We'll get to KZN in a moment, but look at that. I mean, almost half of the Eastern Cape working age population do not have a job, and that's the official figure, by the way. It could be much higher than that when you consider the expanded definition. Zoning into KwaZulu-Natal, it seems lower than the Eastern Cape, but remember, we're looking at population-wise there. So ratio speaking, that 28.7% has risen from Q1 to Q3, and we'll speak to analysts to find out to what extent the riots had something to do with that too.
And lastly, your broad perspective, Devan, of what are the conversations happening about, and I know we do this all the time, quarter on quarter, but what are the key conversations around how do we get this economy, as we start to claw back some growth, to also yield jobs? What are the big talking points about where do we even begin to start to turn this picture around?
You could have a panel of economists around you, and I recall about a month ago we sat down with the investment envoys, the presidential economist. Trudy Makaya was also there. We had Issa Mahlanga from RNB. Some key points that come up. Are we, developing the education system so that we align our capabilities to the business world? That's one thing. The other thing is, are there businesses out there to begin with who will absorb the workers? Look at our investment to GDP ratio. It's sitting around about 13%. In order for you to crack unemployment, it needs to be at 30%. So people need to invest in this country, and our policies are not on the right track, many economists would argue. The structural reform case is there. We've got a task ahead of us to this.
All right, Devan Murugan, thank you for coming through and just highlighting what is a big, big story at this moment.